What if I told you that the very thing you've been taught to hide, to soften, to apologize for, is actually the clearest sign that you are awake in a world that has chosen to sleep? What if the sensitivity you've carried like a burden, the way you feel too much, notice too much, absorb too much, is not a flaw in your design, but the most honest response to a reality that others have learned to filter out? Sit with that for a moment. Let's settle. Because what I'm about to share with you isn't about fixing yourself or becoming less of what you are. It's about recognizing that the discomfort you feel might not be yours alone. It might be the world's discomfort moving through you because you haven't yet built the walls that keep it out. There's a heaviness that some people carry, and they don't know why. They walk into a room and feel the tension no one is naming. They hear the edge in someone's voice that everyone else seems to miss. They watch a conversation unfold and sense the undercurrent, the thing beneath the words, and they wonder why no one else is reacting. And over time, they start to believe something is wrong with them. They think they're too much, too reactive, too emotional, too fragile. But what if that's not what's happening at all? What if they're simply tuned to a frequency that most people have learned to ignore? You've probably been told, more than once, to toughen up, to not take things so personally, to let it go, to stop overthinking. And maybe you tried. Maybe you spent years trying to be lighter, easier, less affected, but it never quite worked, did it? Because the sensitivity didn't go away. It just went underground. You learned to hide your reactions, to smile when you felt like crying, to nod when you wanted to scream. You became very good at pretending you didn't notice. But inside, you still felt everything. And that gap between what you felt and what you showed, that gap became exhausting. Carl Jung once said that the unconscious doesn't speak in arguments or explanations. It speaks in images, in patterns, in the things that repeat until we finally pay attention. And if you've been feeling too sensitive for too long, if that word has followed you through relationships, through jobs, through family dinners and quiet moments alone, then maybe it's not a diagnosis. Maybe it's a message. Maybe your sensitivity is the way your unconscious is trying to tell you that you're perceiving something real, something others have agreed not to see. Jung understood that we all wear masks. He called it the persona. It's the face we show the world. The version of ourselves we've learned is acceptable, and there's nothing wrong with that. We all need a persona to move through social life. But the problem comes when we forget it's a mask, when we start to believe that the mask is who we really are. And when someone comes along who hasn't fully constructed that mask, or who can see through it, they become a problem. Not because they're doing anything wrong, but because their presence reminds everyone else of what they've buried. That's what sensitivity often is. It's the refusal, conscious or not, to participate fully in the collective numbing. It's the inability to pretend that everything is fine when it isn't. And in a culture that values efficiency, productivity, and positivity above all else, that refusal looks like a weakness. But it's not. It's a form of honesty. A raw, undefended honesty that makes people uncomfortable because it reflects back to them the parts of themselves they've worked so hard to silence. In this video, I'm going to share with you several signs, several inner shifts, that reveal what's really happening when you feel too sensitive. These aren't symptoms of a problem. They're indicators of an awakening, a slow, sometimes painful awakening to the deeper layers of reality that most people have learned to live without acknowledging. And if you stay with me until the end, you might find that some of the experiences you've been ashamed of, some of the moments you thought made you weak, were actually the moments you were most alive, most present, most real. You might start to see that what you've been calling sensitivity is actually a kind of sight. And once you see it that way, everything changes. So let's begin. Let's move slowly through this. Because if there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's that you don't need to rush toward understanding. You don't need to fix or resolve or conclude. You just need to notice, to witness, to allow what's already inside you to be seen by you without judgment. The first thing you might notice is that you feel other people's emotions before they name them. You walk into a room and you know something is off, even though everyone is smiling. You sit across from someone at dinner and you can feel their sadness, their anger, their fear, even though they're talking about the weather. And when you mention it, when you ask if they're okay, they look at you strangely. They say they're fine, and you start to doubt yourself. You think maybe you imagined it, maybe you projected, Maybe you're just anxious or paranoid or looking for problems that aren't there. But then, days later, the truth comes out. The person you sensed was struggling admits they were going through something. The tension you felt in that room gets acknowledged in a conversation you weren't part of. And you realize you weren't wrong. You were just early. You were picking up on something that hadn't yet surfaced into language, into conscious awareness. And that's not a coincidence. That's not luck. That's perception. A kind of perception that doesn't rely on words or explanations. It reads the body. It reads the energy. It reads the space between what is said and what is meant. Jung called this the collective unconscious, the shared field of human experience that we all swim in, whether we know it or not. And some people are more porous to it. They don't have the same filters. They absorb what's in the room, what's in the relationship, what's in the culture, and they feel in their own bodies as if it were their own. This is why you might feel exhausted after being around certain people, even if nothing particularly intense happened. This is why you might need hours alone to recover from a social event that everyone else seemed to enjoy effortlessly. You're not weak. You're processing. You're metabolizing emotional information that others left behind without even noticing. And here's the thing. Most people don't want to feel that much. It's not that they can't. It's that they've learned not to. Because feeling that much means you can't ignore the suffering around you. You can't pretend that everything is okay when it's not. You can't maintain the illusion of control. And so they numb. They distract. They busy themselves. They drink. They scroll. They work. They talk. They do anything to avoid the quiet moment when the feeling might catch up to them. But you don't have that option. Or maybe you do, but it costs you more. Because when you numb, you don't just numb the pain. You numb everything. The joy, the beauty, the aliveness. And that trade-off feels unbearable. So you stay open, even when it hurts, even when it's too much, even when you wish you could just turn it off and be normal. And that openness, that refusal to shut down completely, is not a flaw. It's a form of courage. It's a willingness to remain in contact with reality, even when reality is uncomfortable. And that willingness is rare. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding it. But there's a cost to this too, because when you feel everything, you also feel your own pain more acutely. You can't hide from yourself the way others can. You notice the moments when you betray yourself, when you say yes when you mean no, when you smile to keep the peace, when you shrink to make others comfortable. And each of those moments registers inside you like a small wound. Not dramatic, not obvious, but real. And over time, those small wounds accumulate. They create a background hum of sadness, of longing, of something not quite right. And you can't name it. You just feel it. A vague sense that you're living slightly out of alignment with yourself. And this is where the second sign appears. You start to feel like you don't belong anywhere. Not because people reject you, but because you can't fully relax into the roles that everyone else seems to inhabit so easily. You go to a party, and you feel like you're watching it from the outside. You're there, you're participating, but part of you is observing, noticing, wondering why everyone seems so comfortable with conversations that feel hollow. You sit in a meeting at work, and you hear people talking about goals and strategies, and you understand the words, but you can't connect to the energy behind them. It feels empty, performative, and you start to wonder if something is wrong with you. If you're the only one who feels this way. But you're not. You're just noticing something that others have agreed not to notice. You're seeing the persona, the collective mask, and you're realizing that most of what people call connection is actually just a synchronized performance. Everyone playing their part. Everyone staying on script. And when you can see that, it's hard to participate without feeling like you're lying. Not to others, but to yourself. Jung wrote about this too. He talked about the process of individuation, the journey of becoming who you really are beneath the roles and expectations. And he said that this journey often begins with a sense of alienation, a feeling that you don't fit, that you're different, that you're alone. But that feeling isn't the problem. It's the beginning of the solution. Because you can't become yourself if you're still trying to be what everyone else wants you to be. You have to step out of the collective script. You have to risk not belonging. And that risk feels terrifying. Because we're wired for connection. We're wired to belong. And the idea of standing outside the group, even just internally, triggers a primal fear. But here's what most people don't tell you. That fear is a threshold. It's the doorway between the life you've been living and the life that's actually yours. And on the other side of that threshold, there's a different kind of belonging. Not the kind that requires you to perform or pretend, but the kind that comes from being seen, truly seen for who you are. And that can only happen if you're willing to stop hiding. So you start to withdraw, not because you hate people, but because you need space. You need silence. You need time alone to sort through everything you've been absorbing. And people don't understand this. They think you're depressed. They think you're antisocial. They think you're avoiding them. And maybe, in a way, you are. But not because you don't care. Because you care too much. Because being around people who aren't being real feels more lonely than being alone. And this brings us to the third sign. You become acutely aware of inauthenticity. You can feel when someone is lying, not just to you, but to themselves. You can sense when a smile is genuine and when it's a defense. You notice when people say they're fine, but their body is screaming something else. And this awareness makes relationships complicated, because most people don't want to be seen that clearly. They don't want their masks examined. They want you to accept the surface version, to play along, to not ask too many questions. And when you can't do that, when your very presence seems to pierce through the performance, people get uncomfortable. They pull away. They call you intense. They say you're too deep, too serious, too much. And you start to believe them. You start to think that maybe you should just lighten up. Maybe you should stop caring so much about what's real and just enjoy the surface. But every time you try, it feels like a betrayal. It feels like you're abandoning the part of yourself that knows better, the part that can see. And so you're caught between two impossible options. Either you pretend and lose yourself, or you stay real and lose connection. But there's a third option, and it's the one Jung pointed to throughout his work. You stop trying to choose between yourself and the world. You stop trying to fit in or stand out. You just become more fully who you are, and you let the world respond however it will. You trust that the people who are meant to find you will, that the connections that are real will survive your honesty, and the ones that can't weren't real to begin with. This is terrifying, because it means you have to let go of control. You have to stop managing how people see you. You have to stop trying to be likable or acceptable or safe. You have to risk being rejected, misunderstood, alone. And for someone who already feels too much, that risk feels unbearable, because you know how much it will hurt. You know you won't be able to numb it or brush it off. You'll feel the full weight of it. And that's exactly why you've been avoiding it. But here's the paradox. The more you try to protect yourself from that pain, the more you guarantee it. Because every time you hide, every time you shrink, every time you perform instead of being real, you create a small distance between yourself and your own life. And that distance accumulates until one day you wake up and realize you've been living someone else's life. You've been following someone else's script. And the person you were supposed to become is still waiting somewhere inside for you to come back. And this is where the fourth sign shows up. You start to feel a deep, inexplicable longing, not for anything specific, not for a person or a place or a thing, just a longing, a sense that something is missing, that you're supposed to be somewhere else, doing something else, being someone else. And you can't name it. You can't point to it, but it's there, always, like a quiet ache in the background of your life. Jung would say this longing is the voice of the self, the deeper, truer version of you that exists beneath the ego, beneath the persona, beneath all the conditioning. And the self is calling you home. It's trying to get your attention. It's using that longing, that restlessness, that sense of something missing, to pull you toward your own life, toward the life you were meant to live, not the one you were taught to want. But most people ignore this call. They interpret the longing as dissatisfaction. They think they need a new job, a new relationship, a new city. And so they change the externals. They move. They break up. They start over. And for a while, it feels better. There's excitement, novelty, hope. But eventually, the longing comes back, because it was never about the externals. It was about the internal distance, the gap between who you are and who you're pretending to be. And sensitive people feel this gap more acutely than others, because they can't lie to themselves as easily. They can't pretend that the new job is fulfilling when it's not. They can't convince themselves that the relationship is working when they feel alone in it. They can't ignore the quiet voice that says, "This isn't it. This isn't what I came here for." And that voice, that relentless, honest voice, is both a gift and a curse. Because it won't let you settle. It won't let you coast. It won't let you live a life that isn't yours. So you keep searching. You keep trying to find the thing that will make the longing go away. And you start to realize that maybe the longing isn't something to get rid of. Maybe it's something to follow. Maybe it's a compass pointing you toward the parts of yourself you've been ignoring. The parts you've been too afraid to claim. The parts that don't fit into the acceptable narrative of who you're supposed to be. And this leads to the fifth sign. You start to question everything. Not in a cynical way. Not in a way that tears things down just for the sake of it. But in a genuine, searching way. You question the beliefs you were raised with. The values you were taught. The goals you were told to pursue. You start to wonder if any of it is actually true, or if it's just what everyone agreed to believe because it's easier than facing the unknown. And this questioning makes you unpopular. Because most people don't want to question. They want certainty. They want to believe that the way things are is the way things should be. That the system works. That the rules make sense. That if you just follow the path, you'll be happy. And when you start to question that, when you start to point out the contradictions, the hypocrisies, the places where the story doesn't add up, people get defensive. They accuse you of being negative, of being difficult, of overthinking. And maybe you are overthinking. But maybe thinking is exactly what's needed. Maybe the problem isn't that you think too much, but that everyone else thinks too little. Jung believed that the unexamined life leads to unconscious suffering. That when we don't question, when we don't reflect, when we don't look inward, we end up living out patterns that aren't ours. We repeat the wounds of our parents. We perpetuate the dysfunctions of our culture. We pass on the pain without even realizing it. And the only way to break that cycle is to become conscious, to wake up, to see what's really happening inside and outside. And that's what your sensitivity is doing. It's waking you up. It's making it impossible for you to stay asleep. And yes, that's uncomfortable. Yes, it's lonely. Yes, it would be easier to just go back to sleep, to numb out, to stop caring. But you can't. Because once you've seen, you can't unsee. Once you've felt, you can't unfeel. Once you've woken up, even just a little, you can't pretend you're still dreaming. So you keep questioning. You keep searching. You keep feeling. And slowly, something starts to shift. You start to realize that the sensitivity isn't the problem. The problem is that you've been trying to live in a world that doesn't honor sensitivity. A world that values strength over vulnerability, certainty over curiosity, performance over presence. And you've been trying to fit into that world. You've been trying to be less sensitive, less feeling, less awake. But it's not working. Because you can't become less of what you are. You can only become more of it. And this is the sixth sign. You start to reclaim your sensitivity as a strength. Not in a defensive way. Not by trying to prove anything to anyone. But quietly, internally. You start to see that your ability to feel, to notice, to care is not a weakness. It's a form of intelligence. It's a way of knowing that doesn't rely on logic or analysis. It's intuitive, embodied, relational. And it's been devalued, not because it's less valid, but because it's harder to control. It's harder to commodify. It's harder to use for productivity or profit. But that doesn't make it less real. It makes it more real, because it's connected to something deeper than the surface game everyone else is playing. It's connected to the soul, to the self, to the part of you that knows, without needing to be told, what's true and what's not, what's alive and what's dead, what's real and what's performance. And when you start to trust that knowing, when you start to honor it instead of apologizing for it, everything changes. You stop trying to fit in. You stop trying to be understood by people who don't want to understand. You stop waiting for permission to be who you are. And you start to build a life that actually fits you. Not the you that you thought you were supposed to be, but the you that you actually are. The you that feels too much, notices too much, cares too much. The you that's been here all along, waiting to be claimed. This doesn't mean you suddenly become confident or fearless or free of doubt. It means you stop seeing your sensitivity as something to fix. You stop trying to be different. You stop apologizing for taking up space, for needing time alone, for not being able to pretend. And in that stopping, in that quiet refusal to keep performing, something new becomes possible. A different kind of life, a different kind of relationship, a different kind of work. One that doesn't require you to numb or hide or shrink. One that actually needs your sensitivity, your awareness, your ability to feel what others have learned to ignore. And this brings us to the seventh sign. You start to attract different people. Not necessarily more people, but different ones. People who are also awake, or trying to be. People who don't need you to perform. People who can meet you in the depth, in the realness, in the discomfort. And these connections feel different. They don't drain you. They don't require you to translate yourself or tone yourself down. They feel like coming home, like finally being seen, like you can breathe. And you realize that the loneliness you felt before wasn't because you were broken. It was because you were surrounded by people who couldn't meet you where you were. And you were trying to meet them where they were, which meant abandoning yourself. And that's not connection. That's performance. And it's exhausting. But when you stop performing, when you stop trying to be palatable, the people who are never really there for you start to fade away. And that's painful, because even false connection feels better than no connection. Even a shallow relationship feels better than being alone. But it's not true, because false connection is a kind of loneliness. It's the loneliness of being with someone and still feeling unseen. And that's worse than being alone, because at least when you're alone, you're not pretending. So you let people go, not with anger or resentment, but with a quiet acceptance that not everyone is meant to walk with you. That some people are only in your life for a season, for a lesson, for a mirror. And when that purpose is complete, holding on only creates suffering for both of you. And in the space that opens up, new people arrive, or old people show up differently. And you start to build a life that reflects who you actually are, not who you thought you had to be. And that life might look nothing like what you imagined. It might be smaller, quieter, slower. It might not impress anyone, but it's yours. And that's enough. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And for sensitive people, that journey is particularly difficult because the world doesn't make space for sensitivity. It doesn't reward it. It doesn't celebrate it. It calls it weakness, calls it too much, calls it a problem to be solved. And so you spend years trying to solve it, trying to be less, trying to fit, trying to belong. But the truth is, you were never meant to fit. You were meant to see, to feel, to witness, to be the one who notices what others overlook, to be the one who can't pretend, to be the one who holds space for the grief, the beauty, the complexity that everyone else is too busy to acknowledge. And that's not a burden. It's a calling, a quiet, unglamorous, often painful calling, but a calling nonetheless. And when you finally accept that calling, when you stop resisting it and start inhabiting it, the sensitivity stops feeling like a curse. It starts to feel like a gift, not because it makes life easier, but because it makes life real. It keeps you honest. It keeps you awake. It keeps you connected to something deeper than the surface noise. And in a world that's drowning in noise, that connection is sacred. So if you've been told you're too sensitive, if you've been made to feel like something is wrong with you, if you've spent years trying to be less of what you are, I want you to hear this. You're not too sensitive. You're awake. And the world needs people who are awake. It needs people who can feel, who can see, who can't pretend. Because without those people, without you, the collective numbing continues. The lies go unchallenged. The pain goes unwitnessed. And nothing changes. But when you stay awake, when you refuse to numb, when you keep feeling even when it hurts, you create a crack in the collective armor. You become a reminder that another way is possible, that we don't have to live on the surface, that we don't have to perform, that we can be real, messy, vulnerable, human. And that permission, that quiet permission you give just by being yourself, ripples out. It touches people. It wakes people up, not through words or teachings, but through presence, through the simple, radical act of being who you are. And that's the final sign. You start to realize that your sensitivity was never about you. It was always about something larger, a process, a collective awakening, a slow, painful, necessary shift from unconsciousness to consciousness. And you're part of that shift, not because you chose it, but because you couldn't avoid it, because you were born with the kind of nervous system that can't ignore, that can't pretend, that has to feel, has to see, has to know. And maybe that's why it's been so hard, because you've been carrying something that wasn't just yours. You've been feeling the grief of a culture that won't grieve, the fear of a world that won't admit it's afraid, the loneliness of a society that's forgotten how to connect. And you've been trying to process all of that in your own body, in your own heart, without realizing that's what you were doing. But now you know. Now you can see it. And in seeing it, you can start to release it. You can start to understand that not everything you feel is yours to carry. That some of it belongs to the collective. That some of it is just moving through you. And you can let it move. You can let it pass. You can witness it without becoming it. And in that witnessing, something shifts. The sensitivity remains, but the suffering around it starts to ease. Because you're no longer fighting it. You're no longer trying to be different. You're just here, present, awake, feeling what you feel, seeing what you see, and trusting that there's a reason, that there's a purpose, that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. So take a breath. Let this settle. Let yourself feel whatever's coming up. Because this isn't information. This is recognition. This is your own experience being reflected back to you in a way that maybe you haven't heard before. And if any of this resonates, if any of this feels true, then you're not alone. There are others like you. Others who feel too much. Others who see too much. Others who can't pretend. And together, quietly, without fanfare or recognition, you're changing the world. Just by being awake in it. If this resonated with you, if you felt seen in any of this, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Share your experience. Share what came up. Because your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if you want more of this kind of content, more slow, reflective explorations of the inner life, subscribe to the channel. Like this video. Let me know that this matters to you. Because it matters to me. And I'll keep creating it as long as it serves. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for feeling. You're not too much. You're just awake. And that's exactly what the world needs.